Hello, and welcome to Placebo, the podcast where my brother and I take turns teaching each other something about healthcare or medicine. I'm Kaylin Richards, and this is my brother.
And I'm Logan Richards.
And today, we're going to be talking about something a little different than we've done so far.
Ooh, different.
So, yeah, as I just said, our goal, our mission for our podcast is to kind of just spread and increase knowledge about healthcare and, like, medicine, science, kind of related topics.
Yes.
Okay. And we've done a lot of more kind of current topics, I would say, so far.
Okay.
But I like historical topics.
I've heard that before.
Yeah, I've heard it before. So I decided to try a more historical topic for today.
Okay, good.
Okay, just to mix it up, and we'll see what the feedback is. If people like it, maybe we'll do more of that.
Okay.
Okay. So for today, we're going to be talking about Dr. Joseph Lister.
Ooh, I don't know him.
You don't know him. Okay.
No.
So I first heard of him actually when I was on a trip to, in part, Edinburgh with my friend Aubrey. Hello, Aubrey.
Oh, okay.
4 years ago, maybe.
Sure.
Okay, so we went to a museum in Edinburgh called the Surgeons College Museum.
The Surgeons College.
Yeah, and they had a big display about Joseph Lister.
Did he go there? The Surgeons College?
He didn't go there, no.
Oh, okay.
But I think he worked in Edinburgh for quite a while, and especially at the beginning of his career, and made some of his important discoveries there. So I think that's why they had this big display for him.
Oh, so he was Scottish, or he just ended up in Scotland?
He just ended up in Scotland. He was English.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about him. I haven't really told you what he did or why he's famous, but we're going to start with
He was a doctor?
He was a doctor, yes.
Okay.
But we're going to start with a little bit about his childhood and growing up, a very little bit about his childhood.
Okay.
And then get to why I wanted to talk about him today.
So you're going to leave me on the edge of my seat?
It's a cliffhanger, so you'll keep listening.
Okay.
Okay, so brief early history for Joseph Lister.
Okay.
He was born on April 5th, almost my birthday.
Ooh, yeah. One day off.
1827.
Oh, well, that's a few years off.
That was a few years off, actually, from my birthday.
Yeah.
But in the spring, which is a nice time to be born, I think.
I guess so.
In Essex, in England.
Okay.
His parents were Joseph and Isabella Lister, and they actually had 6 kids, so kind of a lot of kids.
I guess.
Maybe it was normal then, actually.
Yeah.
Okay. His father owned a wine business.
Okay.
But he was also a scientist himself.
A wine scientist.
Oh, no, his science work was unrelated. This is like in the era when people were just scientists on the side.
Oh, that
or
sounds like a nice
gentleman
era.
scientists. Yeah. I wish that I could be a side scientist.
Scientist on the side.
Yeah. So he had this wine business, but he also designed a new microscope lens.
Oh, wow.
And he wrote some papers about red blood cells.
He sounds like a successful side scientist.
Yeah, so interesting. But Joseph, after he grew up there, and then he decided to study medicine.
Okay.
And he and his family were Quaker, and the only, apparently, university in the UK that he could go to at the time as a Quaker was University College London.
Why is that?
The rest of them only were open to, like, Anglicans, I guess.
Oh, okay.
So it was open to non-Anglicans.
Well, University College London is kind of a popular college even today, right?
I think so.
I hear about it all the time, just randomly.
I think it's a big school.
Okay.
So he attended there. He graduated in 1952. I thought it was interesting.
Graduated with what?
A degree in medicine.
Oh, could you just get that right away? Back in 1827?
So, yeah. So it said that he had a brief bout of nervous problems, but it didn't specify what that was.
What is that? Like he was anxious, or like he had a nerve disorder?
I have no idea. He had some like neurological problem, or he had some anxiety issues. Who knows?
Okay.
He had some trouble. He recovered.
Oh, good. Well, that's, the right outcome in the end.
Yeah, I don't know. This is the language of the time.
Okay.
And he became a surgeon. And this is not like someone goes to medical school and decides to become a surgeon today.
Right.
Can you think of why that might be the case? Like, what were some differences in the perception of surgery and the actuality of surgery at the time.
I would imagine that most people died in surgery.
Yeah. Anesthesia had just been...
and it was painful.
Yeah, it was really painful.
Okay.
So anesthesia for surgery had just been invented in 1846.
Oh,
so that's just a few years before.
Okay.
It was brutal. It was not a very respected field because it was not a very successful field, I would say.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah. But I found an interesting quote from Joe, our buddy Joe.
That's what you call him?
Yeah, this is in 1853, so the year after he graduated? He wrote a letter to his dad, and he said, if the love of surgery is proof of a person's being adapted for it, then I certainly am fitted to be a surgeon, for thou canst hardly conceive what a high degree of enjoyment I am from day to day experiencing in this bloody and butchering department of the healing art.
Oh my goodness.
I am more and more delighted with my profession. So he liked it, which is a little bit creepy how he puts it.
Very creepy.
But he felt like it was the place for him to be. So
okay. I'm not
good.
sure I'd want him as my surgeon.
Well, you would have by the end, though. Maybe not at this beginning.
Okay.
Okay, so he finished, he graduated, he was working for a little bit in London, and then following the advice of one of his professors, he decided to travel to Scotland, to Edinburgh, to visit with James Syme, I'm guessing, Syme, who was a surgeon. So he was supposed to go up to Edinburgh for 1 month, but he ended up staying 7 years in the long run.
Yes.
He didn't.
So basically, he moved to Edinburgh.
So he moved. Yeah, it was not really a trip. He moved there. He did an apprenticeship with Dr. or Mr. Syme.
Or you were telling me why surgeons are called Mr. even today.
Yeah. So I think it's because in the beginning it was a mark of disrespect. I think because they were, as I was saying, this being a surgeon as opposed to a doctor was seen as a lesser sort of medical skill.
Right.
So they were called Mr. to reflect that they were not as good as a doctor, I think.
Even though they had the
so you'd be doctor and then revert back. And so I think that's still the case today, although now surgeons like it as a mark of respect that they are called Mr. and not doctor.
Oh, that's very weird.
This is what I've heard anyways. I'm not sure if it's still the case, but I've heard that it is.
All right.
So he had such a good time studying with Mr. Syme that he also ended up marrying his daughter.
Mr. Syme's daughter?
Agnes.
Okay.
Yeah, who actually was, it said, very well educated, which was not the case for a lot of women of the time period.
Okay.
And I remember seeing in the museum exhibit that I saw in Edinburgh, she was big assistance to him and helped him a lot with his experiments throughout the rest of his life.
Who did she help? Which one?
Oh, Dr. Lister, her husband.
Okay.
Yeah. So he was there for a couple years, 1850. Yeah, a couple years. And then
I thought he was there for 7 years.
Yeah, after he was there for a couple years. So he was doing his fellowship with Mr. Syme.
Okay.
And in 1855, he was made a lecturer.
Right.
Can I say that right?
Yes.
At the Edinburgh School of Medicine. And then in 1856, he was an assistant surgeon at the Royal Infirmary there.
Okay. Is that another word for hospital?
I think so, yeah. So just to kind of give a little bit of a baseline as to, we've talked a little bit about how surgery was not a very respected field, was pretty bloody. He described it himself as brutal.
Right.
Some things, just kind of general information about the state of surgery at the time.
Okay.
Okay, so in general, bloodstains were seen as proof of a good surgeon. So if they had
bloodstains where?
On their coats.
Oh.
So if they had bloodstains on their coats, that would be a sign that they did their surgeries really rapidly, and so blood was just splashing around.
Yikes.
And that was a sign of a good surgeon because anesthesia was not very reliable at the time. Or a new idea, and so they wanted the surgeries to be quick.
So did they just leave the blood stains on the coats as a mark of...
Yeah.
Oh my God.
It said that bed linens were seldom washed. Also, white coats were seldom washed because it just wasn't seen as necessary. And in this case of the coats, it was seen as this surgeon's getting a lot of surgeries. I can see the mark on his coat, and he's clearly fast, so he's a good one for me. They only they only wash their surgical instruments when putting them away after a surgery, not before they did a surgery.
Well, I can see where this is all going.
So they would do rounds like on the hospital ward, and the surgeon would use a probe to kind of poke around in the wound and see if there was any pockets of pus that should be drained out.
Oh, good.
And because they thought pus was part of the normal state of healing, like it was normal that you would have a wound and then it would get pus all full up in it and you would have to drain that out, and that was just normally how something should heal.
Okay.
So they would use the same probe on all the patients.
Good.
So they'd go from one, poke around in that one's wound, drain out some pus, and go to the next one. This is terrible.
So I'd say that these hospitals had a 100% hospital-acquired infection rate.
Oh, yeah. So infection mortality rates were, like, really high.
Yeah.
There were, like, serious recommendations from a lot of doctors at the time that they should, like, ban or severely limit all surgery because it had such high death rates that they thought it was, like, doing more harm than good, and they shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is kind of where he's at as he's becoming a surgeon. So you can see why it was not, like, a straightforward choice to just go into surgery.
No.
Right?
It seems like it was a bad choice.
Yeah, so I don't know what that says about his personality exactly. But he was kind of a very curious guy from the beginning. And as we've talked about, like, his dad was a scientist. His dad was...
A side scientist.
Was a big influence throughout his life in encouraging him to experiment and encouraging him to think creatively about problems that he was encountering.
Okay. That all sounds very good.
Yeah. So from the beginning of his career as a doctor and as a surgeon, he was interested in inflammation.
All right.
Which at the time they thought was actually like a separate disease, not a disease process. So today we would say inflammation is a result of an infection, for example. So yeah, people thought that inflammation was its own thing. Like, you have inflammation, it's a disease that you have.
Oh, okay.
They didn't realize that it was a cause of, or a symptom of a bacterial infection or whatever. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, he didn't really make this connection either until later in his career. At the time, they thought infections, or a popular theory for the cause of infections was miasma theory.
Ooh, tell me about that.
Have you heard of it?
Nope.
So it was the idea that there would be like a kind of a bad thing in the air, and that bad air would kind of spread from person to person, and that's how they would get sick.
Oh, okay.
So that's why...
I could see how they would think that.
Yeah, I think it's part of the idea where they would recommend like a change of air. That's kind of like an old style thing, like... Someone has tuberculosis, they would recommend a change of the air so they get fresh air to heal, which is not going to help you heal from tuberculosis. But
fresh air is always a good thing.
But they just thought something's wrong here.
Okay. Why is it called what it's called?
Miasma?
Yeah.
It's Greek, and I don't remember what it means in Greek, but it's an old, like, this is the time of ancient Greece. Like,
okay.
What is it? Pliny the Elder used to believe in miasma theory. So this is an old theory, and this was still... Right. Believed in the 1800s.
Okay.
So our guy, though, Mr. Lister.
Joe,
yeah. He became familiar with the work of Louis Pasteur.
Okay.
Have you heard of him?
No.
No?
I don't know any of these people.
Pasteurization?
Oh, I've heard of that.
Okay. So yeah, Louis Pasteur, he was a French scientist.
Okay.
And as part of his work, he discovered how bacteria can... grow in like a sugar solution. He was helping a farmer, I think, who was trying to brew alcohol.
Okay.
And so he had like vats of kind of this sugary water, but then some of them were spoiling and some of them were brewing and fermenting as they should.
So he figured out how to pasteurize milk?
So no. So he came to Louis Pasteur and was saying, hey, can you help me figure out what's going on with my fermentation? Some of it's working, some of it's not.
Okay.
And so then he found out that bacteria in the air could be getting into some of the vats that the farmer was pasteurizing in, or fermenting in, not pasteurizing.
Okay.
And that they could either cause it to spoil or cause it to do well, depending on the types of bacteria or yeasts that were ending up in the vats.
Okay. Now that you've triggered my memory, I'm picturing these. Did we learn about in school, like, pasteurization has something to do with like a fancy array of glass things pipes leading where you boil in one section and then it evaporates and comes down into another section?
I don't know. This sounds scientific, though.
Okay, maybe
you might be making it up, but I like the idea.
Okay.
So anyways, this kind of got Lister thinking about how bacteria in the air were landing in these vats of sugar water, basically, and affecting how things were fermenting. And he thought maybe it could be doing the same thing in wounds. Instead of miasmas and just bad air, maybe there was bacteria that was causing the problem.
I think he sounds like he's onto something.
Okay, so but then he also thought, well, a lot of the wounds that we have are not exposed to air. They're covered up, right? They're under bandages.
Okay.
And he thought, well, maybe could bacteria be transmitted via touch? Like when the nurse or the doctor takes off the bandages to poke in it or to change the bandage.
He's definitely onto something here.
Yeah, and he thought his experiments proved that, yes, infections such as like gangrene, which was super common, could be caused by microbes either in the air or by touch.
Okay.
So he thought, he had an idea. He was going to start trying out his idea that it was bacteria.
Okay.
By treating compound fractures that had broken through the skin.
Right.
Okay. So at the time, the treatment for compound fractures was amputation.
Okay.
Because when they would try and set them, there was such a high rate of terrible infection that most people would end up needing an amputation anyway.
So they just went straight in for it.
And so even with the patients that had been amputated, a large percentage of them would die as well. But because they had kind of the residual limb, the fluid and pus and stuff could drain out the end of that, whereas the people that had like a compound fracture set and closed, it would be all contained in their legs, say, and they couldn't drain very well and they would die.
Okay.
So he decided that he would begin his treatments with people with compound fractures, because if it didn't work, he could still go to amputation, which would be the standard of care.
All right.
Right? So he thought he would give it a try. And he knew that he wanted to kill bacteria. And he had heard about some sewers being cleaned nearby in Carlisle, which I believe is in Scotland.
Sewers. That's good. They need cleaning.
And, and they had used something like carbolic acid, it was called, to clean the sewers. To clean all the bacteria out of the sewers.
I'm guessing he's figuring, why not just throw that on the wound?
So he's like, well, I know this kills bacteria, so he did use a diluted solution of carbolic acid.
We're just going to use sewage cleaner.
Well, he's like, it works. It's very powerful. I'll just dilute it. And he had great results.
Oh, good.
Like amazing differences. Like most of his patients survived, whereas before most of them died, right?
That's because everyone was getting infected before.
So,
well, that's good.
He presented, this is in 1867. He had 2 papers published about this. And then
Where did you publish papers in 1867?
So there was a British medical journal that's really old called The Lancet. That's where
The Lancet's still there?
It's still around. Yeah, that's where he published those.
All right.
And then he also presented at the Dublin meeting of the British Medical Association, so like their conference.
Okay.
He gave a speech, and he said, here's his quote.
Oh, good.
Previous to its introduction, the 2 large wards in which most of my cases of accident and of operations are treated were amongst the unhealthiest in the whole of surgical division at Glasgow Royal Infirmary. I should mention he's been working at Glasgow in this time. But since the antiseptic treatment has been brought into full operation, my wards have completely changed their character, so that during the last 9 months, not a single instance of pyeanemia, some sort of infection, hospital gangrene, hospital-acquired gangrene, or erysipelas, which is another infection, has occurred in them. So none of them, which is pretty good.
Joseph Lister seems to be a very well-spoken man.
Yeah, so...
It's almost poetic in his quotes.
So the trouble, though, there's a little bit actually about his personality.
Okay.
It says that he was like very kind and thoughtful with his patients.
Yeah.
But with his like students and with his colleagues, he was kind of shy and humble. So he didn't really speak up for his ideas as much as he could. And then he also was not very, it seemed like he was not very tactful maybe in the way that he did speak when he spoke up. It said he was strictly forthright. So if he thought people maybe weren't understanding him or were being stupid, he would say so. So his ideas were not very well accepted because it was kind of a combination of he was very kind of minimizing a little bit what he thought what his ideas could do. Like for the first while when this was first introduced, it was only like his idea with treatment with carbolic acid was only used for compound fractures, even though clearly it could be used for all types of infection.
Right.
But because he was so specific in the way he presented it, then people didn't really consider that it could be applied in other ways.
That makes sense.
And then,
plus, it was kind of out there, right?
It was kind of out there, yeah.
If he's not advertising it well, then the idea of being out there is not going to make people want to do it.
Yeah. So, for example, there was another really respected doctor at the time in Britain, James Simpson.
Was he a mister or a doctor?
He was a doctor. He was an obstetrician.
Okay.
But he brought anesthesia to the British Isles. Anesthesia was first introduced in America, in the United States.
I've been there.
Yeah, right now, in fact. So this James Simpson, he thought that the solution for infection in hospitals was quickly built wooden structures, and then you could abandon them and build a new one once the rate of infection got too high. I think he was a believer.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think he was a believer in the miasma theory, that there would just get like too much of this air of bad air around in a building, and then you'd have to abandon it and get to a new one.
What if we still did that?
There would just be millions of abandoned hospitals, like cheap wooden hospitals
and
everywhere.
You couldn't break them down. They
super creepy. Yeah. So he kind of made his reputation, Dr. Simpson, by both like kind of advancing his own ideas for these cheap hospital structures, but also like casting down Mr. Lister's ideas, like saying how stupid they were. And in general, which I think is a little bit funny, because they believed in this miasma theory, but maybe it just seemed to make sense because it had been around so long.
Right.
You know, that they thought that invisible microbes, things you couldn't see, could cause infection, that most people thought that this was just ridiculous. A lot of people thought this was crazy and stupid, and why would you possibly think this? You can't see it, so why would it be the
But they're
case?
kind of like the exact same idea.
Yeah, it's odd because it's really, really similar.
It's like the invisible things in the air causing infection is like could either be bacteria or miasma, whatever.
I remember in the exhibit in Edinburgh, they had like a lot of examples of doctors at the time giving their opinion of what he was proposing, that it was just...
What Joe was proposing?
Yeah, what Joe was proposing, that it was utterly like ridiculous. That this could ever be the case, and he was really outcast in a lot of like medical society at the time.
So funny.
Yeah,
like the basic premise of both of them are that invisible things that we can't see are causing infection.
I don't know, but the miasma had been around a long time. Yeah, but they didn't care for his solution, I think. Another thing is that other scientists or other doctors tried to do experiments to study it as well, antisepsis, but a lot of the times they were poorly designed, and then they didn't have good outcomes. Right. So this frustrated Lister a lot, and he just kind of withdrew from the whole idea for a while.
Yeah.
But...
I would imagine if they don't really understand what's going wrong, then they don't really know how to control infection very well in their studies.
Yeah. So, but he kept working. He worked in Glasgow, as I said, for a while. He went back to Edinburgh, and then he was offered the chance to come to London.
Okay.
And he didn't really want to go because he had finally kind of made a name for himself in Edinburgh and was respected there, but he felt that it was his life's work to kind of spread this knowledge, and he wanted it to become more widely known. So he did go to London.
It's probably a good choice for all the rest of us.
Yes, actually, by the end of his life, he was very respected. He was honored. His ideas received the attention that they deserved. Towards the end of his life, the King of England at the time had to have an appendectomy and specifically requested that Lister advise his surgeons before the surgery, and he said he owed his life to Lister.
Wow.
So he was given baroncy. He was made a baron.
Oh, cool.
In 1897.
Does that mean you get a certain area of territory in the UK or something?
I think in his case, it just came with a title. So he was a Sir.
Okay.
Sir Lister. And then he also served as the president of the Royal Society of Medicine in London from 1895 to 1900. So he was really, really lauded at the end of his career.
Okay.
He then died in 1912 when he was 84. And his funeral was held in like Westminster Abbey. So clearly like very famous.
Good spot for a funeral.
For the fancy people.
Okay.
So that's kind of Joseph Lister.
So
in a nutshell.
So he invented the method to eliminate infection?
In surgery, yes, and in recovery from surgery. And it's not really what we do today, though, because his method was antisepsis. So
meaning
he was...
What? Meaning killing bacteria?
Yeah, so he was killing bacteria that were present
okay.
in wounds and on people.
With sewage cleaner.
With sewage cleaner. And he changed his methods throughout his career, but...
Okay.
but that, I think, was always a large part of it, that carbolic acid.
All right.
Today, though, we try to use aseptic technique, so we don't try and let any bacteria get there in the first place.
I see. Okay.
So this is why surgeons, scrub really thoroughly and wear masks and gown, and everything is sterilized in the operating theater.
Yeah, and they have super clean air, just in case the miasma bacteria. But they do, don't they?
Filtration systems, I guess. I don't know about that.
Yeah, I read about that in the hospital design episode.
I remember you talked about that.
That's like one of the cleanest air locations in the hospital because
is
of
in
all
the
that.
OR. Because
just as we know, there's bacteria in the air.
As Lister studied, bacteria can travel by touch or in the air.
Right.
Yeah. So, we try for that asepsis now. Obviously, I think people try. I don't know if it's 100% all the time.
Yeah.
But we also have tools that he didn't have, like antibiotics to treat people if they do get an infection.
And we sterilize things better, probably.
And people wash their coats.
Wash their coats.
You don't see bloodstained doctors walking around the hospital, I'll tell you.
That would be gross.
Super gross. Also, infection precautions are standard in hospitals now, which, depend on if a patient has a certain type of infection, there are different types of precautions that should be followed. But even for people without any specific precaution, there's universal precautions. Do you know what those are?
Washing your hands.
Always washing your hands when you enter and when you exit a room.
What else?
Well, you should wear gloves when dealing with any body fluids.
Okay.
Yeah. They have higher levels of precautions for people that have more contagious infections or things that are more difficult to kill, like MRSA. A lot of people have heard about MRSA. We probably should do an episode about that at some point.
And other antibiotic resistant bacteria. Right?
So you can see that Lister made a huge, I think, change in the field of medicine and in the survival rates of people having surgeries. So today we see a lot of people having elective surgeries. That would never have been the case.
Right.
This was 150 years ago. As I said, surgeons at that time or doctors at that time were thinking that surgery should probably not be done at all or only if there was no other option. And there was one quote I had from a doctor at the time saying that abdominal surgery and brain surgery would be forever forbidden to any humane doctor because he just thought there would be no hope for the patient if they had that type of surgery.
And of course we do that all the time now.
All the time, yeah.
Well, not we, but other,
And even, in that person's own time, the King of England was having an appendectomy.
Right.
And survived.
Abdominal surgery.
Yeah, and survived just fine. So, I think there are always more we can do. I mean,
because we still get a lot of hospital-acquired infections.
Yeah, hospital-acquired infections are still a problem, even with all the things that we do today. And I think I hope that there will be more changes in the future to help prevent these things from occurring for people.
Yeah. I've heard that hand washing, I don't know any of the numbers, but I've heard that hand washing is still not done as much as it should be. It's
not. Even with Purell dispensers, everywhere. You go into any medical facility and you see Purell dispensers.
Every 5 feet.
Or I should say hand sanitizer dispensers. That's probably
no
a
buzz
brand.
Marketing.
Sorry. I have seen articles that talk about doctors in particular of all healthcare providers still tend to be the people that don't do hand sanitizing or hand washing as often as they should.
Ooh. Yeah, I just thought of another thing too. That we've been told in school that we should never wear ties to work.
Yeah. Gosh, don't do that.
Yeah. Well, and then, a physical therapist can have kind of like a business casual kind of attire, even in a hospital, I'd say. But that wearing a tie, the way that it hangs down and can drag on a patient, I guess, but also like their linens or other surfaces in the hospital and then transfer bacteria to another area. So wearing a tie is actually really bad practice.
And it's a soft surface,
in most cases.
So it's not very sanitizable. Yeah. Like you can sanitize.
And people often don't wash their ties.
Yeah.
At least not often.
Yeah. So I'd like to wrap up this episode here.
Are we going to buzz market the one thing that's named after Joseph Lister?
Oh, sure. Let's bring it up just because it's funny. He wasn't alive when this was named.
I figured.
No. So a type of bacteria was named after him.
Okay.
Listeria.
Listeria.
Okay. And then also, what else was named after him?
Listerine.
Yes.
Mouthwash.
Killing the bacteria in your mouth. But yeah, he wasn't a part of that. I don't know what he would have thought of that.
Is there anything else named after him? It seems like we should have some type of antiseptic
Hold on a sec. I did have something else.
stuff named after him.
I'll also mention he's got an awesome look. He favored the mutton chops throughout his life.
Ah.
Long mutton chops.
Now, I wonder how the mutton chops handle air.
Here are some things that were also named after him.
Okay.
There's the Lister Hospital.
Oh, I've never heard of that.
It's in Stevenage, Hertfordshire, England. There was an expedition to Antarctica in 1901 to 1904, and they named a mountain after him.
Why?
Mount Lister in Antarctica. I don't know. Someone liked him. There's the Listerine Mouthwash. Oh, I am so sorry. He was alive while that was invented.
Oh, what did he think of it?
1879. I don't know. Doesn't say. And then there was as I said, Listeria. It's a pathogenic bacterial genus.
Okay.
It's typically foodborne. So not really the type of
Not
bacteria
really the bacteria that he cleaned.
There's also a slime mold named after him called Listerella.
Listerella.
Yeah, that's him. And then there's buildings and statues and stuff named after him.
That makes sense.
Yep.
He was a baron after all.
He was a baron. So, brother, I hope you enjoyed this topic today.
That was wonderful. I'd like to learn more about fancy old doctors.
Oh, well, we might do that.
Okay.
I like researching fancy old doctors.
Okay.
One thing I would say bad about Lister is he did not think that women should be the equal of men in medicine. So, boo on that. But
unfortunately, that's not surprising for a man of his time. Right?
No, I guess not. Even though his wife was like a huge influence and help in his studies and research.
That's weird. You think he'd have, but maybe he didn't feel comfortable making that opinion public or something because of
the time. Who knows?
Well, that is the one downside of researching old white men is that they often have outdated views in many areas.
For their honeymoon, by the way, they spent 3 months visiting medical hospitals, medical institutions in France and Germany. That was their honeymoon.
Oh man,
Agnes was like way into it.
Oh really?
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah. Okay, so I hope you, brother, and all of our listeners enjoyed this week's episode.
I did.
Okay, great. You're the only one here, so I'll take your opinion for the rest. Everybody else, too.
Okay, good.
If you, listener, enjoyed this week's episode, you could please give us a like or a rating on iTunes.
You could also visit our website, placebopodcast.com, for any further information that you like. And also feel free to share us with a friend on our Facebook page.
All right. Thank you to James Aiken for our music.
And we'll see you next week with a new topic.
All right. See you then.
Goodbye.
So look, here he is when he was young. This is when he was like in his 20s. Oh no! Come back, microphone. Okay. Sorry about that, guys.